Go ahead.
Hello everyone, welcome to our 7th episode of OpenStack and Beyond. Today is February 3rd, 2016, and we'll be focusing on ecosystem and tooling, contributing code, building projects in OpenStack community, and also all the consideration involved. First, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Arthur Berenson.
Hey guys.
And I'd like also to start with a quick introduction. So who want to start from the panelists here? Bill? Bill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. Hi, I'm Gal Sagie, open source software architect working for Huawei European Research Center. I'm focusing mainly on networking and containers, mostly on OpenStack, working 100% open source with the community and trying to push several projects in OpenStack to enhance networking and containers and the way we deploy and work with them.
Excellent, thanks very much. Next in line is Ilan.
Hi, so I'm Ilan Rabinovitch. I lead the community and evangelism teams at DataDog, working with our open source community. And in my past lives, I was an OpenStack administrator and user at Uyala, where I ran a number of data centers on OpenStack.
Okay, so last is Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Mew. I'm the CMO at Compare the Cloud. We are commentators on the market and active bloggers and advocates of cloud and with it. You're IBM veteran who has spent years working on channel strategies and looking at ecosystems.
Okay, thanks. I think that we got here a fairly interesting topic that I think the entire OpenStack community is kind of been struggling around for a while here. I think if I look at the history of OpenStack, we started with everything needs to be OpenStack native, and we had kind of different projects, including PaaS. And as soon as those projects started to touch on many areas, people started to ask what is the core of OpenStack, what's not core in OpenStack, where should it go, and then came the initiative of OpenTent, which kind of opened up OpenStack to a less of, if you like, a strict structure of contribution. I'd like to start first maybe with Gal here. What do you think is the rationale behind the Big Tent initiative?
Well, Nati, to me, the main rationale is basically to allow different innovation in the same area of interest while keeping and supporting free choice for the user. So instead of, I think, limiting new projects that overlap with certain functionality, which is something that we saw previously, we are now, OpenStack is now welcoming different implementation of the same area as long as they operate in the OpenStack way and the OpenStack rules of doing things. If I'm trying to consider if this is working or not, in my opinion, it's the right direction, but it demands a certain maturity from the community, because there is a line between different innovation and allowing all of these projects on one side and overcomplicating things for the users and deployers, because you have so many options in the other side. So I think the technical committee and the new project creators needs to be responsible and try to work together where it makes sense. But I think overall this is a good direction, and I'm happy to see all the various different innovations in that area.
Excellent. So maybe Arthur, you could touch on again what was the history of what we had before we actually democratize the OpenStack community, and then let's go to Bill and touch on the area that I think Gal mentioned. Are we complicating things, or is it working?
Right. So initially, when OpenStack started, it was mostly around the core virtualization functionalities, and that kickstarted the Nova project. So initially, all the projects were basically structured around the core virtualization functionalities that Nova provided, and suddenly we need security, so let's create a project called Keystone, and then create a project called Glance for providing images, etc. So, and based on that structure and that way of collaborating, basically mandated that same or similar areas of interests had to be contributed to the same existing project. And that basically introduced some limitations where basically you had multiple groups of developers seeing seeing a lot of rationale in solving the same problem in a completely different way. And I think one key example really that we see emerging in the past year or so is obviously containers, where it doesn't necessarily makes sense to just introduce a new container driver for Nova. Rather, it probably would make sense to have a new project for container management around OpenStack. But still, the core functionality there would be to actually handle the runtime of the application itself.
Mm-hmm. So, Bill, I think Al touched on an important point here, which is a trade-off between being open or democratizing the process in which projects can be introduced, which was for governance, to complexity. What do you think about that?
I think the maturity point that he made is very valid. The OpenStack community is definitely maturing, and it is refining the way that it makes progress and innovation. But unfortunately, the OpenStack community isn't operating in a vacuum. It is up against a competitive platform such as AWS, where there is no need to organize by committee in the way that the OpenStack community is doing. And you're looking at the growth rate in AWS, you're looking at Azure making rapid innovations, launching its own stack into the market to enable hybrid environments. While the maturity that OpenStack is showing now and the progress that it's making is admirable, there has to be questions made about the progress and the speed at which it is innovating in comparison to some of the other platforms out there.
I see. So basically, I think the three examples that you mentioned, if I take AWS, Azure, and OpenStack, what you're basically saying is that the result is that despite the openness of OpenStack, actually the dictatorship in these examples are advancing faster than the democracy.
It is always difficult to organize by committee. If you have to have agreement, if you're constantly needing to have checks and balances in terms of coordination, then that is obviously going to be an added layer of complexity. The problem on top of that, however, is the fact that for every particular amount of effort put into collaboration, each one of the players in OpenStack is competing with each other within the OpenStack market, and therefore you have a duopoly between different objectives, either to collaborate to move the whole platform forward and also to innovate, to differentiate themselves within the OpenStack community in terms of what they're offering. And this leads to less of a focus. Now, for all the fact that most of us buy into the open source idea, buy into the principles here, if one were to decide the most rapid means of innovating and reaching an objective, it possibly wouldn't be by committee.
Got it. So you're basically saying that there needs to be another level of changes in the structure itself to allow OpenStack to move faster than the structure that it is right now. And OpenTent, even though it's in the right direction, it's still not. It doesn't solve the problem yet of the speed of innovation because of the lack of structure. I think happens in the other example, which I think used some sort of a dictatorship model to
I'm not advocating dictatorship within OpenStack. I just don't think it'd work. And I think the open tent approach is a vast improvement of what on what went before.
So maybe a question to the group. So having said that, that's basically the open tent approach happened only not due to internal competition between internal participants within OpenStack, but also from pressure from external technologies such as Azure, AWS, etc. So so I think like what are your stance? What do you guys think with regards to what would happen within those clouds? Do you think like the OpenStack, the open tent approach would affect also the external public, the additional public cloud providers? So they would also allow a similar model internally to have internal services touch pointing similar services, but doing a bit different implementation. So do you think other groups would allow such cases?
It's not whether they would allow such cases, they're just different structures. And I think one of the most telling changes that we've seen in the last year has been HP's change from initially being one of the main champions of OpenStack and a player in the public cloud to then withdraw from public cloud. It is still very much a part of the whole OpenStack consortium, but it has gone to Azure as its breakout public cloud alternative. And that is very telling. It is almost an acceptance by one of the core members of the OpenStack community that maybe in the public cloud environment, OpenStack hasn't made the necessary progress, and that is why it has reached out and is collaborating with Azure.
Interesting. Now, a question here to Ilan with regard to kind of twisting back to what Gal mentioned and kind of focusing back on the OpenStack ecosystem itself. Does the marketplace solve or helps to solve the problem of that Gal mentioned, that there's the fact that we have many tools for the same problem, the fact that we have many options to solve the same problem makes it difficult, but maybe with the marketplace we can put things in order and see which one is good or not based on popularity and other things like we have in the App Store model. Is that a solution for that problem? Does that work?
I think from my perspective, as somebody that's more of an administrator of OpenStack and now somebody that's building monitoring tools around OpenStack, I think what we'll start to see solve this problem is more is more something like the Linux distribution model that we see, right? There's there are folks out there that are spinning their own Linux distros and they're starting from scratch, but most folks are grabbing RHEL or CentOS or Debian or some other certified grouping of technologies that somebody has already gone through, tested, and QA'd and vetted as being an integrated set that works well together. And I think it's a similar case. I think it's something we're already seeing this, to some extent, in the OpenStack community. We're going to see even more of. There's just so many options as you're trying to figure out. I mean, just within, and if regardless of what we're talking about, do you run something at the project level like Neutron versus versus Nova Network? I mean, just looking at like something like load balancers as a service. Do I use the F5 load balancing backend, or do I use HA proxy, or do I use a NetScaler, and which of all of these things works best together? And that's where I think turning to folks like HP, turning to folks like Red Hat, Canonical, whomever, who've already tested all of these pieces together, know what works well. I think that's where we're going to see some of these problems solved, rather than the upstream project. The upstream projects, I think, are going to stay as flexible as they are right now, just because there's so many competing interests in that space, as Bill was mentioning earlier. People just have different directions they want to go.
Yeah, so if I summarize that, I think all of you are saying is that one, the OpenTent democratized the process of introducing new projects, even competing one, which is generally a good thing. And it does also add the complexity in terms of the fact that we have now more than one option the same, if you like, problem. And that potentially makes things a little bit more complex. There are a couple of ways in which I've seen the OpenStack trying to address that. I think you mentioned, Ilan, one of them, which is the distro themselves. So the vendors that consume the upstream have the responsibility to choose the tools that they think would fit best to their customers and provide the guaranteed support. And by doing so, they're making choices on behalf of their users and bets, obviously. Other tools there, I think, trying to put order through more, if you like, collaborative choice, which is the marketplace. And I think there is also, I've seen a way in which the OpenStack itself rates its projects based on a maturity level and progress. So I think you have better view on certain projects, at least on their maturity and how to choose them. So I think with the combination of all those things, we're getting in the right direction. There is still the challenge that I think Bill mentioned. That having said so, we're still not at the same speed as the public cloud environment because of that governance model, and that's something that I think still needs to be there to maybe sorting out the way decisions are being made to make OpenStack simpler from the level of variety that it provides right now. So let's move to the next question. It's basically, if we look at the project within OpenStack, and now we have more of them. Is there kind of a clear case that you would say, and that would be a question to Gal, that project shouldn't be part of OpenStack?
Well, it's a difficult question because personally, I'm very in favor of richness and strong ecosystem and against blocking innovation. I think that every project that we see in OpenStack is basically coming from a real user need or some sort of a company offering to enhance the way that we use the cloud now. At least that's what I hope. I think that the critical point here is that it's our responsibility as a community, and I think both you and Bill mentioned it earlier. If we want to move fast and try to, I don't want to say compete, but try to offer the same offerings that public clouds are offering right now, we need to combine and centralize efforts where it makes sense. So we need to remember that every project that is an official OpenStack project represented, and we should strive to work together, solve as many common use cases and many problems that we could from different companies for different deployers and for different users together, and that's what will help us innovate and move faster.
So basically, OpenStack, as Ilan mentioned earlier, was started to solve the private cloud problem. Basically, build an infrastructure for basically enterprises and companies to create some sort of cloud environments, either for themselves or used publicly, and that was basically the goal for the OpenStack project. Now, that was long time ago, and since then we've also heard a lot of intentions, a lot of claims to actually make OpenStack not just a cloud offering, rather make it a community of integration of multiple technologies and projects, and provide standard APIs for those integration points between those technologies. So would you agree that would be the mission statement currently for OpenStack, or do you agree that this is the right approach for OpenStack?
I think so far there's been a massive focus on functionality in every one of those projects, and addressing what you describe as the client needs and what has been driving the entire project has been foremost. Unfortunately, functionality has been driven forward at the expense of usability, and it's no joke that you possibly need to be a rocket scientist actually to get OpenStack to work across the board, and it is that complexity that OpenStack has yet to conquer, and that is what has held it back, and that is why companies such as HP have struggled to make the progress that they wanted with using OpenStack, and that is why there are so many OpenStack instances that are still stuck in proof of concept, and there's so many people arguing that whether or not it is enterprise ready, when maybe of the public cloud alternatives, nobody would argue that they aren't enterprise ready. And OpenStack needs to overcome that usability challenge.
So basically what you're saying is that the first priority for the community is to make sure that OpenStack is the user experience of it would be improved, rather than announcing it as an integration project and basically allowing different types of community vendors or community contributors adding more and more complexity into the project itself.
That is, you can't necessarily have both at the same time. The more functionality that you bolt on and bolt on and bolt on without necessarily providing the simplification for the usability side of things, the more of a challenge it is. And there is a real skills challenge out there. And if you have the right OpenStack skills, that's great. You're in massive demand, but there's a shortage of those skills. And actually, if you look at the DevOps environment, many of the people are moving away from OpenStack because of its complexity, and they are flocking to the AWS platform, the AWS marketplace, because they can get things on a platform that's enterprise ready, and they can the speed of which they can spin up different services is just so much better.
I see. I'll come back to that, Bill, because I think that's maybe the answer to that would be the distro themselves that supposedly provide the same level of, if you like, choices. But you're right to say that they're not there yet, and I'll get back to that in a second. A question to Ilan here, in terms of the right approach to that, and the right approach to the democracy. It's actually for Ilan and Gal here. There are still many tools that are not part of OpenStack, but are fairly popular by OpenStack users. I mentioned a few of them: Cloud Foundry, OpenShift, Docker, Mesos, obviously Cloudify, our own Cloudify, and also DataDog itself, the company, the product that Ilan, I think you're part of, are not part of OpenStack, but it's still used by OpenStack users. Maybe the right solution is that not every project needs to be done within the OpenStack umbrella.
Sorry, go ahead, Ilan.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd agree with that, especially in I mean, most of the projects that you mentioned there, they cross not just the OpenStack community, but also a bunch of other cloud solutions, or just bare metal without the cloud involved at all. So it's it'd be, I think while a monitoring project like DataDog might fit somewhere within the OpenStack community, and of course there are some monitoring projects that the OpenStack community is generating. It makes a lot more sense if you want a tool that's going to work both in your hybrid cloud environments with Amazon and GC and Azure, in addition to what you're doing with OpenStack. Those projects are likely going to have to come from the wider open source community and the wider commercial community, not necessarily within OpenStack itself. I don't.
We draw the line. Where is the project needs to be part of the OpenStack open tent, and when is that going to be part of the broader open source community? How would you?
I would say that's when I think that comes when if you're part of if you're OpenStack specific, and in that whether that means that you're part if we see OpenStack as an integration engine, as Mark and the team mentioned during the keynotes in Vancouver, then then that's where you belong. If you're part of that piece that's driving the coordination between components within OpenStack. If you're running on top of it, or if you're something that interacts with a bunch of other cloud and infrastructure management solutions, then you want to sit on the layer above, interacting with the APIs, but not necessarily being part of the OpenStack project itself. I think we can agree a tool that was, for orchestrating AWS instances is probably not a fit in OpenStack itself, whereas looking at something like Terraform, right? Like, they're a great fit. They're going to help you across all of these clouds, but they don't necessarily fit within OpenStack directly. And I'd say DataDog's a similar story with regards to our monitoring solutions.
And Gal, you're a contributor to OpenStack. Where would you draw the line? When do you expect a project to be part of the OpenStack, OpenTent, or whatever, and when it should be part of the broader open source community?
I think the answer also relates to what Bill said earlier. And I totally agree. I think we focus too much on functionality in OpenStack, and since it's such a big project that a lot of companies are working and trying to push their use cases and their different functionality, what we received is so complicated, so a lot of complicated configurations and a lot of complicated features, which makes it hard to use OpenStack. I think one of the main problems is that we combined implementations for the various APIs inside OpenStack. I could see it very strong in Neutron, in the networking side, where we are now trying to split between the different projects. I think that OpenStack needs to focus on the API level, on the initial goal to make things simple to manage private public clouds, and implementation-wise, we should have it separated from OpenStack. I think that the more we see users using OpenStack, we will see these mixed environments where they have users using OpenStack with containers, with Dockers, with Kubernetes, with all sorts of other management, orchestration, and other frameworks, as you said. We need to make sure to bridge between these frameworks and not try to bring them to OpenStack. So I think we need to do more cutting in terms of what we enter to OpenStack, because it is too much complicated right now, and it's only getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the complications getting worse in some ways, and in some ways this is obscuring the initial purpose that we set out with for OpenStack. OpenStack has been trying to do everything for everyone, and its progress has been in some ways painfully slow, and the advent and introduction of containers has outflanked it on one side to an extent, and people at one side, they will want the choice. Some people will want bare metal, some people will want containers, some people want OpenStack instances, whatever, but at the same time they want simplicity, and I think it is apocryphal the fact that Microsoft this month has launched the Azure Stack. And the reality out there is companies are moving to a hybrid environment because volume economics would indicate that workloads and data will eventually migrate to the largest, cheapest platforms possible, and that's public cloud. But at the same time, there are mitigations around security, provenance, sovereignty concerns, which would favor a more private environment, and therefore that is a reason why hybrid is emerging as the favored option by most corporates. And with Azure this month launching or making public the Azure Stack, you suddenly have what is a single structure where developers can write once and either deploy it to the Azure environment in the public cloud, or use the Azure stack with the same deployment on a private cloud in a hybrid environment. And that provides the simplicity. That's describes a write once, use anywhere environment, which ever since HP and others withdrew from public cloud, you simply don't have with OpenStack. Now, IBM may be a champion, or maybe Oracle, that can keep OpenStack with a presence in the public cloud, but at this moment in time, the complexity of trying to create these hybrid environments with OpenStack is too great, and it's being outflanked by the moves such as the availability of the Azure stack from Microsoft, that is making life so much simpler for developers wanting to move in that direction.
Arthur, do you want to say
Yeah,
something?
so actually, two questions that pop up to my mind following your statement. So basically, so do you think it's up to the OpenStack Foundation to solve, or at least to operate to the direction of solving the complexity problem, or do you think it's something the vendors providing an enterprise video or a stable edition build of OpenStack? It's up to them to solve the complexity problem rather focusing on functionality. Obviously, where having said that, obviously vendors have a lot more push from their customers to deliver more and more functionality. And the second part of the question is, do you think it's up for OpenStack to solve the hybrid / public clouds scenario in integration to other clouds maybe as well? Do you think it's part of the foundation or part of the community members to solve that problem?
I think in terms of, I think the complexity needs to be solved by both sides. It's not something that can be. The vendors are basically the ones that are contributing and working on the projects. The committee itself cannot be the watchdog for everyone, so it's something that we need to do as a community. For the hybrid, I think that right now, in my opinion, we won't find one solution that can magically combine and solve this problem. It's a problem that needs to be solved both from the OpenStack side and both from maybe smart orchestration or smart management entities on top of OpenStack and on top of the public clouds. Maybe these top managements could be with the OpenStack API, maybe not. But I think there are still a lot of missing parts inside OpenStack. For example, a project that I'm involved with, spanning networks across clouds, peering networks across clouds. So there are still missing components inside OpenStack to enable a hybrid approach. But there certainly needs to be some sort of orchestration or federation, depending on your model, for the hybrid cloud that connects this all together.
So question to you, Gal. I mean, you've made a choice to build your project within the OpenStack environment. What did you made that choice? Did you consider doing it elsewhere? And explicitly decided to go there? What were the considerations for you to make that choice?
I assume you mean Project Kuryr.
Yes.
So Kuryr creation, the story behind it is that I actually met with Anthony Segura Pumadon from Idekura in OpenStack Israel in the last OpenStack Israel Day, and we actually talked about this problem. We exchanged ideas, and we decided to work on this together. And along the way, while we were working on ideas and on design, we talked with a lot of other companies, with a lot of other deployments, and we found out that this is a pretty common problem that people are trying to solve. So we found out that a lot of people are doing it in different repositories, in different projects, but trying to accomplish a very common goal of working with containers and with containers orchestration engines within OpenStack mixed environments. So it made sense to make this as an OpenStack project and combine the efforts from all of these companies and people. And I think that the problem we are trying to solve is a critical problem for OpenStack because, as we mentioned earlier, we are going to see more and more of these mixed environments, especially with containers and containers frameworks and orchestration engines. And Kuryr mission is basically to simplify management and orchestration of this by basically reusing what we have right now in terms of networking in OpenStack already in Neutron, and using this flexibility for containers networking. So I think the end goal of Kuryr is actually to simplify setups, and we talked about how important it is to simplify things in OpenStack.
Yeah, and does it? What do you think about Magnum in that context?
Well, I'm not part of the Magnum team, so I spend a lot of time talking both with Adrian and Denyon from the networking part in Magnum. We talked a lot about Kuryr and how it fits in Magnum. I think that the main goal of Magnum is to expose APIs to manage and make containers orchestration engines first-class citizens in OpenStack. So you have a common API to manage this environment, and I think Kuryr is quite different in this approach. So we are trying, instead of saying, okay, we bring all of these environments, Kubernetes and Docker Swarm and Mesos and all of these environments that people are using to deploy containers as is to OpenStack. Instead of doing this, we are trying to bring them while using things that we have in OpenStack, like the networking, and simplifying the way that we manage, orchestrate, operate, and also perform in these mixed environments. So we bring OpenStack richness, I think, to, or this is at least the goal, to container world. And we are right now working on modeling and integrating Kubernetes. And as I said, the end goal is to simplify these environments to leverage as much components in OpenStack instead of using a lot of new and less mature solutions that are coming for the containers world. So in terms of relationship, I see Magnum as a user of Kuryr, and I think that the goal for both communities is to make Kuryr the default networking driver for Magnum.
So, Bill, do you think that containers will help to solve some of that complexity that you mentioned in OpenStack? And
I think that containers could be the salvation for OpenStack. Containers could provide an environment where you can allow individual companies to work on different containers, to work on different innovations, to using the container model to bring it all together with the basic OpenStack functionality, providing the management and orchestration to coordinate all of it. And you also then have the right once use anywhere functionality with containers to have the portability between public and private environments, to have the best of both worlds in the hybrid solution. So if OpenStack can adopt and integrate containers effectively, then containers could be OpenStack salvation.
Mm-hmm. And just one last question on that regard. Why haven't we seen too many public clouds provider of OpenStack? I mean, we are working, for example, with data centered, and I know that Miranti said some portion of that. IBM do something about it, about public cloud. Why are we not seeing more of that in your view?
I think IBM stand out as a champion that have stayed the course and are still keeping pace with the major cloud players. I think Oracle are also a major challenger. If Oracle are to be believed in terms of their ambitions and their investment in cloud, then they will be a key organization to. Unfortunately, both of these organizations have almost been hindered by the progress made by OpenStack in terms of taking their hybrid offerings forward. They just had to wait for the OpenStack community to mature. And I think Azure and AWS left the station and have achieved an enormous lead there. So I don't think necessarily that in reality there will be a massive OpenStack public cloud champion. But if you've got a containerized environment where you can have the portability using containers between any environment, that becomes less of an issue.
I see.
I think I'm actually seeing more. I think that OpenStack is now in the stage where it matured enough to start becoming a solution for public clouds, and I actually think that we are going to see more offerings in that front pretty soon. I think it's the 1-2 years from now are a critical point to OpenStack. It's starting to get deployed seriously in production, and I think it's a testing period right now if it could fit.
I see. So I think if I kind of conclude the comments here, and we want to conclude the discussion here, I think we've mentioned a couple of things here. One of them is that we're, in one end, we're seeing a democratization of OpenStack with the initiatives like OpenTent. That in itself lead to more diversity on one hand and more options, but at the same time, it does create more complexity. There are a couple of things that OpenStack is trying to do to actually overcome that. One of them is through the marketplace. The other one is the distro themselves taking responsibility for packaging the right tools that are mature and deliver an OpenStack with an SLA attached to that. Bill mentioned the fact that that containers could be a way to solve some of that complexity because it does provide a common ground in which a lot of the tools can work with, and that in itself would make the use of them easier rather than seeing too many options on how to configure them and set them up. The reason why we're starting to see some portion of public cloud, I do agree with Bill that the public cloud, the lack of public cloud, or at least at massive scale, is a big inhibitor, and IBM with Blue Box and the other things that I think is starting to pile up may be a solution for that. So I'm hoping that that in itself would change, because obviously having a public cloud, an OpenStack public cloud, is by far the easiest way to use OpenStack. And I think that's the other part that I think we've touched on. Both I think Gal and Ilan talked about the choices of making a project within OpenStack, and so I think if I try to categorize that, and Arthur helped me there, I think that what we're basically saying, if the project itself is natively integrated with OpenStack, like in the case of Kuryr and obviously Magnum and Neutron and others, then it needs to belong to OpenStack. And if it's more generic, if it touches the application but needs to be more portable, like DataDog, Cloudify, and others, then it probably needs to be within the broader open source community. A project like Magnum, I think, does a good job on bridging between the native OpenStack project that are built for OpenStack and the outside world. So I think it's an interesting approach, not to create yet another, if you like, container orchestration, but rather than creating just a gluing mechanism to bring whatever is available on the open source community into OpenStack. In that case, we're not creating yet another OpenStack native alternative, but we're leveraging the broader open source community, but in a more native OpenStack way. So we kind of gain the benefit of both worlds. Other than that, are there any concluding remarks, tips that each one of you want to mention for users who are considering to contribute to OpenStack, use OpenStack, etc.? So let's start with Ilan.
Yeah, I mean, I think my closing comments are actually probably more for the OpenStack community rather than for the users. I think you know, as the vendors and developers of the project, we need to find ways to improve the onboarding process for new administrators, for new users, for new developers. I think for somebody coming from outside of the community, it's still a bit of a challenge on where do you get started? What do I, you know, what pieces do I grab and who do I speak with if I want to run a cluster myself? What are the best practices around monitoring that? You know, that's something that the DataDog team has been trying to help document and help put out there. And you know, as a developer, you know, I want to squash my first bug. You know, what's the best way to get started there? And just offering those on-ramps in, I think, is going to help get, you know, not that there's a lack of companies with interest in working in OpenStack, but I mean, helping individual contributors be more productive from the start just means that we're going to improve some of that velocity that Bill and others had, you know, commented on earlier.
Yep. So let's go with Val now.
I think my experience is that for first-time contributors or new contributors, the way that OpenStack run things can be a little bit complicated, a little bit intimidating at start. But I think open source work is a lot more rewarding to me than other work that I have done. I think that it takes time to get used to it, and it's sometimes a bit slow, but it's something that you learn over time, and I want to see more new people coming and helping and discussing. I think a critical point, and I think the OpenStack Foundation and all the committees are doing it, are starting to do it quite good, is leveraging and understanding feedbacks from the operators, from the actual users, and applying their correct priorities and pushing for the features that are most missing and are most needed by our operators, because we build OpenStack for them in the end goal. So I want to see this increasing, and that's it.
Thanks very much, Gal. Bill?
I think OpenStack has a positive future. I think things are coming together now as OpenStack matures, as containers provide a way forward for some of the things that OpenStack is seeking to achieve, and as with the Blue Box acquisition and other things that IBM are doing, and the announcement by Oracle of the massive investment that it's making, I still there's a positive future. There have been some hiccups along the way. The slow progress it's made to reach enterprise readiness, some of the missed opportunities by HP and others. But I think there's a positive future out there. But unfortunately, this isn't happening in a vacuum. When we were out in Tokyo, we saw that the OpenStack community was growing at about 35%, and we've just seen results from AWS, which is growing at 70%. And although the Microsoft figures are a little bit opaque, there are some figures suggesting it could be growing as fast as 140%. So you just need to realize that much of the market is moving ahead, and that OpenStack is actually getting things together a lot better than it has, and I think it does have a place and it does have a future, but it needs to actually accelerate if it's to keep up.
Excellent. Arthur?
Yeah, so I definitely echo the need for a OpenStack made simpler. I think we've been talking about complexity with OpenStack for quite a while now, and I was really happy to see the advancement we made in that area in the Tokyo summit. Definitely we've seen less announcements and more stability and stabilization of existing projects, making sure they're more easily usable, etc. And definitely happy to see the democratization of the various projects. I think this allows innovation within OpenStack itself. Obviously, a lot of innovation around the containers, which could be the way OpenStack would be made simpler. And this is the first area I think that would make things easier, but also in terms of orchestrating the application themselves and making them more portable around OpenStacks, and wouldn't mandate a specific configuration of OpenStack. So definitely happy to see that actually taking place. A lot of new projects are being announced to make things simpler rather than making things more complex, introducing new functionalities. So that's definitely going to the right direction. I'm happy to see that.
Excellent. So I think we're ready to wrap up right now. I would like to end with what Gal mentioned. You could be part of the solution if you want to, and it's intimidating at the first sight, but there is a lot things moving on, and one of the nice things that I like about OpenStack is the fact that your voice is being heard, unlike if you like the other public clouds or the other dictatorship, as I would call them. Your voice is being heard, and you can see it release by release, and I would encourage you to be part of the solution rather than just complaining on the problem. Thanks very much all for joining us, and thanks for making that 7th podcast very interesting. Talk to you later.
And we're planning on having another podcast on the ground at Mobile World Congress, so keep an eye out for that.
Thanks
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.